Where do the strange noises outside the tent during camping come from? Spooky tales await. Subscribe now. I could greatly appreciate this, coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was really not much to see, I guess, but there were a lot of trees and a small creek a little bit further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird sort of roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I had researched pretty well before our trip and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it just didn't resemble that, except for the fact that it was a deep roar. I guess if you get what I mean, but startled but not really scared. I guess I continued to scan the rest of the forest, for as far as I could see from the porch, and it was then when my eye caught a glimpse of a figure well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall as a reference. I'm 64, and I thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was well hidden because it had brown fur. That's what I think it was at least, or the skin. In any case, it blended in well with the trees in autumn. It was definitely aware of our presence. As I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight, I couldn't tell you what it was, but I swear that it was not a bear. Whatever it was bipedal and had rather long arms. I would say we looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably more like 5 seconds before it just suddenly vanished behind a tree and I heard another roar. It was then too that I felt all of the hair on my body stand up, and I was definitely very much scared. I went inside as quick as I could and locked all the doors and closed all the curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off, as just my exhaustion of driving all day playing tricks on me. But I promise you that whatever this was, it was real. After an hour or so, I had finally calmed down and I went to sleep. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful really, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself, after having drank beer the night before, the weather had cleared up a bit, and it was pretty sunny, and as far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful again. No sight of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city. That never sleeps, and so ends also my story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night, because I know all three girls did not like to hear scary stories, and I figured that after all these months that this was the best place to share it. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, then feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. Something tells me, though, based on those long arms, that whatever it was not common to the area. This happened about 8 years ago now, almost to the day in fact, so I was living in one city and working in another city, about 20 minutes away. Since then, the areas between have been hugely developed, but at that time everything between these cities was just undeveloped back roads with nothing around, no buildings, no sidewalks, no lights, just rough old roads until you get into the other city to get to work on time. I had to leave my house at 3:30 in the morning, and one morning I jolted awake at 3:20 full of adrenaline, as I realized that I only had 10 minutes to get myself ready and set my dog to be alone while I was at work. Needless to say, the circumstances had me highly alert, rushing and focused. Also, I was driving a lot faster that day, but I drove down this road every day as I went to work. I used to usually take that time to wake up, but this time I was wide awake. All I could think about was what would happen if I ended up being late for work. I was really anxious when suddenly my headlight shone up something in the distance ahead of me. Now what I saw was a naked, skinless man crossing the road on foot. When I say skinless, imagine those diagrams in your life science classes. Everything beneath the skin revealed and intact, except in this case with a sort of shiny wet appearance, bright pinks and reds all over, like literally a living skinless person. No clothes, no shoes, and notably appearing oddly content. He seemed strangely at ease, considering that he was crossing the road into nothingness in front of a speeding car in the dark at 3:45 in the morning. There was no walking space suitable for humans out there for like miles as well, and the area that he was walking into was pitch black. Nothing there, but weeds and rocks the direction that he was coming from the same. No light now to roam, nothing now. Like I said, I was sober and super awake at this point, so I have no doubt in my mind that I wasn't hallucinating or tripping or anything, but I have no idea what it was that I saw that day. It was 1998. I was 8 years old and visiting my dad's childhood home. The town where he grew up was so small that you could drive through it within 10 minutes. I still remember the smell of steak from the mum and pop-owned restaurant, the sweet cookies from the bakery, and even the cigarette smoke from the hair salon that my grandma used to run out of her basement from 15 years earlier. The house had to have been built in the early 1900s. The floors creaked and there were vines all over the front of the house that my dad wanted to get rid of, but my grandma liked the way that they looked. I gave her privacy. She said my brother slept in my dad's old room, which was primarily blue. I remember the Chicago sports team posters on the wall edges, torn and frayed from time, and the occasional water damage. Out of the 2 remaining rooms, I chose my grandmother's linen room, and my parents took the spare room downstairs. I remember the room being sort of frilly white, frilly curtains matched the white lace comforter on the bed. Her sewing machine in the far right corner in front of the window, where she would watch my dad play in the backyard. My dad playfully whispered, "That's the haunted room." You know, my dad was, and still is, a bit of a jokester. I remember scrunching my nose at him, and put my suitcase on the floor in front of the bed. Little did I know, though, that he wasn't kidding. My biggest worry was that I would wake up in a puddle from my 4-year-old sister, who shared the bed with me that night. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, though, and sort of looking around. Everything was dark, except for the dim light that came from the bathroom down the hallway. The shadows from the sun machines hit the wall and looked like boxcars. I turned over to face the left side of the room, and that was when I saw her at first. I thought it was my mom, a silhouette of a woman who was standing in the doorway of the room. She was wearing a white dress. My mom didn't wear dresses, not even a nightgown. She had long fine hair, and my mom had the typical fluffy 90s do-cut at her shoulders. I quickly realized that this wasn't my mom, and panic suddenly set in. She was all white skin, hair, dress, everything. I remember that she also had a sort of subtle glow about her. She was leaning on the door frame watching his sleep. Her head was tilted to the side, resting on her right hand that was being supported by her elbow against the frame. I guess I could say that I wasn't scared, but she was terrifying, but sort of comforting at the same time. It was sort of like she was watching her own children sleeping lovingly. I remember closing my eyes and praying that she wouldn't come near me, and she never did. The next morning I went to the kitchen where my grandma was already awake, making us breakfast waffles with several different syrups, and a huge bowl of assorted fruit. I didn't talk or eat much for the majority of breakfast, and my dad definitely took notice. After a few minutes of coaxing, I finally told him what I saw, and he immediately looked at my grandma and said, "See, I told you this is a recollection of a camp out that I had a few summers ago, and the exact details have started to become fuzzy. But I'll try to relay it as best as I can. So it's a Boy Scout camp, northern Wisconsin. I'm sure you can probably guess which one. It's got a smiling tent as a mascot. There's maybe a little over a dozen of us, some scout leaders too, all within a little clearing that makes up where one of the many troops are set up, 2 boys to each tent. At this point, me and my best friend from very early childhood at tent buddies, and on maybe the 3rd night at this camp is when this happens. So I remember falling asleep pretty normally. It's dark, and I wasn't the last one to leave the campfire. After dinner, me and my friend both were in our sleeping bags on opposite sides of the tent. Our bags are at our side and our hiking boots right by the door carefully removed when we entered the tent. Eventually I wake up to strange sounds, hard breathing or maybe soft grunting or whatever. It's the dead of night, like 2:00 or 3 in the morning, must have been around that time. I'm sort of frozen and I look around at the walls of the tent, but nothing seems amiss, just this heavy low breathing sound. It was then that I see my buddy is awake as well and we are both frozen and terrified. He starts to say something, but I put my finger to my lips and make the shushing gesture. Behind his head, where he was laying, something is brushing up against the tent, poking into the artificial fabric, almost sort of antler-likey. I also could have sworn that I heard someone say, "Hello, is anyone there?" My friend then sees this and lets out a small gasp. Something pokes through the tent. Suddenly sharp and black. A loud exhale and then whatever it was, just steps back. We hear branches crunch and twigs snap fading into the distance. We stay awake for another hour, and in hushed whisper try to rationalize what the heck just happened, asking if we should check outside the tent. We both don't remember falling asleep again, but we wake up in the morning. The hole in the tent is there, along with 3 to 4 more similar ones on various sides of it. By the time the other boys in the camp were waking up, I had the courage to check around the tent to see if there's any footprints, broken twigs, or something to determine just what was outside of our tent, and behind our tent were bare human footprints. They circled around our tent several times, but never did they lead to or from the tent. Just 3 to 4 rings of footprints that looped around it. We asked around to see if anybody had actually pulled a prank on us, but everyone that was there swore that they hadn't. Whatever happened. Me and my buddy talked about it a few times on that trip, but these days we refuse to talk about it again. I've always wanted my own dog. I put a lot of research into it and decided to get a Burmese mountain dog, which my mom graciously paid for part of as a graduation present. One thing to know about this breed, and my dog in specific, is that they are very friendly and don't know a stranger. Before getting him, I saw videos of the same breed just napping while repair people came into the backyard. This was not an issue for me. I mean, we have a very protective Saint Bernard at home, and I didn't think that we needed a second guard dog, and as I wanted to be able to take my dog out, it was better for him to be friendly anyway. So around October, when a chill was just starting to form in the air, a friend and we decided to get some pumpkin-flavored coffee for us, and a pup cup for Cyrus, and go to a local park to get him some exercise now that it wasn't too hot for him outside, and to smoke some as well. This is not one of the nicer parks. It used to have a dog park attached to it, but due to flood damage continuous as well, it was closed down, and now the area where it used to be is mostly secluded, and there's plenty of people who use that to their advantage and do drugs there as well. There's also lots of families on the weekends go there as well, but this was the middle of the week during school and work hours, so the park was pretty empty. When we got there, as we walked past a man who was training for something that I'm not sure that I'd like to know about. To be honest, he was carrying a full army pack and was drenched in sweat, and when I later told my stepdad about this, he said that he had seen the same guy running along the main road where there are no sidewalks. Sirius completely ignored him. We also met a couple who had a Rottweiler puppy a few months younger than my dog, and we stopped to let them play for a moment and talk to the couple. The Sirius had absolutely no issues with the pair, and was very happy to receive pets from them as well. Eventually we got to the location we were planning to smoke at, directly underneath the train tracks, which is the most secluded location in the park. There's only one path to get to it, unlike the rest of the park. That sort of loops around. This area used to be a road, but it was purchased by the city for the park, so it's empty besides a house or two just past the barriers. We were there for maybe around 30 minutes before an older man walks by, gives us a "how's it going" the way people do when you pass them on a walk, and turns around and walks back the other way. A little while later he passes back again, and notices us still sitting there, stops and says, "Are you girls all right? Are you waiting on a ride?" This did creep me out a bit, but I tend to be overly cautious. So I say, "Oh no, we're okay," which was completely true. I mean, I had driven there, and I was still nowhere sober enough to drive, and we were just enjoying the nice weather before it got too cold. He responds by telling us to have a nice day and turns around. Sirius, through these interactions, just continued to play with his stick that he was chewing on. I mentioned these encounters is just to solidify how absolutely strange the next one was. So soon after, a man, who seemed to be in his late 40s or early 50s, starts to walk toward us instead of turning around like the other man had done. He starts to walk toward us and Sirius absolutely loses it, barking and growling at this man and attempting to lunge at him. Despite the fact that he was only around 7 months old this time, Sirius was a big dog, probably around 70 pounds at this point, and the man was very freaked out and continuous past us, walking faster and keeping his distance. However, like I said earlier, there's nothing behind us besides an empty road and thick, heavy woods. My friend and I continued to sit there talking until I was sure enough that he was gone. That was weird, right? I asked my friend around 30 minutes later. Huh, she agreed with me. I mean, where did he even go? Anyway, that was something I hadn't considered at that time, but looking around I couldn't think of anywhere that he could have been. Because we are high and stupid, though, we come up with the brilliant idea to wait and see if he passes us again, and if he doesn't, we'd walk towards the road behind us to see if there were houses that he could have gone to. However, him living in one seemed pretty unlikely. I mean, he was dressed for hiking, clearly with one of those backpacks specifically made for it, and if he lived so close I didn't think that he'd be dressed up for a hike or anything. He doesn't pass us again, so we walk up the small hill and past the barricade. There's around 3 houses just past it, all pretty run down, and the second that we got to the first one, a man comes out on this porch with a gun and just stares at us, so safe to say that the people who live there aren't a fan of people from the park on their property. I don't know if that's connected, but I think the only solution is that he went into the woods. I've never seen my dog act like that before, and I haven't seen him act like that since then. Every other time he acts like everyone he meets is known for life. I've always thought that dogs have better instincts than us, and I think that this just proved it for me. We are both pretty small girls, around 1 and under 5 feet 5 inches, and it's scary to think what could have happened had my dog not been with us, and I mean, we had no way to defend ourselves in such a secluded area. Like I said, this place was like forest beyond us, so really there was no reason for this guy to go there. My hunch is that he actually passed us. We realized that our dog wasn't going to let him get near us, and ended up just continuing walking so that he didn't look too suspicious. It's either that or he was involved in something in that house, which begs the question, what the heck is going on in that dilapidated house? This morning I woke up at my usual time, 5:00 a.m., to go to the gym before classes. I'm off campus staying with my parents. However, they're away for the month, so I've had the house to myself, and while every morning I wake up, let my dog out to go and do his morning business, shower, brush my teeth, and let him back inside before I get dressed and leave. This morning I woke up feeling a little bit weird. The house sort of had a bit of a strange energy to it, I guess, and my gut sensed that something was up. I let our dog out into our pitch-black backyard. The deck light didn't turn on like it usually does, which was a bit unusual, but I didn't think too much of it and went to go and take a shower. After my shower, I went back to the sliding glass door to my dog to let him in, and I could see him sitting there waiting for me. I opened the door and watched him, a large black lab, walk in and go under a table. I then proceeded to close the door and walk to my room to get dressed. But here's where it gets weird. You see, as I'm leaving the area where the back door is, I felt that same strange feeling that I had been feeling all morning. I decided to look at the dog bed and noticed that he wasn't in it, so I looked back at the door and saw, to my utter confusion, that he was still sitting outside. My stomach instantly dropped. I mean, I could have sworn on my life that I watched him come in the house and go under a table. I walked back to the door, let my actual dog inside this time, and instantly searched my house to see if another animal came inside at some point, and I didn't find anything as I thought more about it, though the thing that I let in before looked more like a shadow rather than a dog, I guess. And it sort of moved differently too, although it was around the same size. I called my girlfriend to tell her about it, as she was waiting for me at the gym, and she said that it was probably just my imagination, but I have never ever imagined something this real. I wasn't even tired too, and I definitely saw it. I noticed that my dog was acting a little strange too, staring at one of our walls and growling quietly as well. In any case, I left soon after and I got on with my day. I must admit, though, that I am a bit out of my loss as to what to do. If anyone has a possible explanation to ease my nerves or knows what I should do next, then I would love to know, because I'm really dreading sleeping there alone tonight. A couple of days ago, I was walking my dog around the lake at my condominium, like I always do. It was around 6:30 p.m. and the sky was getting a little bit dark, but my dog is a golden retriever, and she's very friendly with people and other dogs too. She's 6 months old and she rarely barks or growls at anybody. She actually loves being petted by strangers, in fact, but she's usually very calm too, regardless of if people pet her or not. Anyway, we were walking and suddenly I turned around and I saw this guy coming out of nowhere. The guy looked a little bit odd. He had glasses and he sort of seemed to be walking nervously. He was still far away from us, so I didn't think that he was nervous about my dog or anything. As he got closer to us, though, I just sort of stopped and moved to the side, like I usually do when there's somebody coming from behind us. I do this so that they can walk ahead of us, and my dog stops constantly looking back, moving its tail looking forward to being pet. But instead my dog just sort of starts getting, I don't know, like restless, and also starts growling nervously. While looking at this guy, I tried to calm her down and I smiled at the guy trying to be friendly, but the guy just sort of looked at me with a really serious face and started reaching for something out of his backpack. At this point, my dog just starts barking and I get this bad feeling and a shiver goes down my spine for a second. I thought, what if the guy had a weapon or something? The guy just kept walking looking at me while reaching for something in his backpack. As my dog kept at him, I apologized for my dog's behavior and tried to tell him that my dog usually doesn't behave like that, but the guy just seemed to ignore me altogether. Finally, he just passes us and my dog starts barking again, but she's still really agitated. I just sat down next to her trying to calm her down, while the guy just got lost between some of the houses at one point, instead of just walking the lake path, which seemed very weird to me. Now maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the guy just didn't like dogs, which is fine. I guess I try to be really respectful to people who don't like dogs. But after he got lost from our sight, my dog just went back to her usual friendly self, and we were able to finish our walk. But I don't know, something felt really off about this guy, and the encounter altogether made me feel really uncomfortable. To preface this, I've dealt with sleep paralysis, night terrors and shadow people since I was a child. I think it all started when maybe I was around 9 or 10, and it got worse as I entered my teenage years. Granted, I was dealing with a lot of abuse and childhood trauma at the time, so when they stopped after I moved out at 19, I just chalked it all up to stress. Flash forward to the present, though I've moved into this new apartment a couple of states over from my hometown almost 4 months ago now, but things have felt really good here too. I live with my roommate or best friend, 28-year-old female, and her 2 cats and her dog, but I felt the vibes were kind of off sometime last week, and I smudged the house and kept all the windows open to help out the negative energy and bring in some more positive energy. Later that night, my roommate confessed to me that she'd been seeing shadow people in the hallway at night, and that the night before one came up and actually touched her door handle. We keep her door propped open for the cats to run in and out, otherwise they scream. I assured her, though, that I felt something was off too, and I already cleansed the house. We had no problems the rest of the week, and she still hasn't seen any shadow people since then. However, Friday night I went to bed, as normal, had no problems falling asleep. My room stays pretty illuminated with a bright blue light that comes from the speakers on my PC. The light never shuts off on the speakers, even when my PC is off, so I can see everything really well in my room at night, and at some point I woke up from a dream, and I saw what I can only describe as a demonic woman. She sort of looked like the girl from The Ring, but in what looked like, I don't know, aeroplane style clothes, the best way that I can think to describe it. She was in my open closet, though on my clothes like a rock climber, and she sort of tilted her head so far back that her face was upside down and facing me. She had a long tongue, and she was moving her head all around and shaking it like crazy. I couldn't move. I tried to reach for my phone to call my roommate to wake her up, or bang on the wall behind me the opposite side of her room. So I was just stuck there, laying there and watching this weird demon lady on my clothes in my closet. I was able to rationalize and tell myself that it's all a dream over and over again to try and wake myself up out of it. I finally woke up as I was trying to yell for help, but it kept coming out as a sort of whisper. I finally jumped out of bed in my empty room, and after looking around, she was gone. I was able to fall almost right back asleep after shaking off the whole experience, but I went ahead and cleansed my room again Saturday morning and spent some extra time on that closet as well. I mean, I've had sleep paralysis before, but this felt a bit different. I slept fine Saturday night, and last night the room felt good. Now I haven't had any stress, or have had anything happen that would trigger these again. It would suck if I moved several states away from home and straight into a haunted apartment. But if you have any thoughts and ideas on what I can do, that would be much appreciated. My girlfriend told me like 2 weeks ago that she was waiting in line at the convenience store with her friend in Chinatown, New York City, and this large dapper-looking man came over to them. Apparently he complimented her coat and commented how expensive it must be. She said thank you, and they chatted for a little longer. The man explained how his suit was just a Brooks Brothers suit, but she noticed that he had all sorts of expensive jewelry on. When my girlfriend and a friend explained that they were students, he kept making assumptions about how they must be rich, and that their parents are paying for everything. My girlfriend was starting to feel uncomfortable, and began trying to distance herself from him. He asked them if they had jobs, and they told him no, as they were students. After this, he went on to tell them what he does for a living, without being asked, mind you, and he said, I do all sorts of odd jobs, and that I mainly have these guys that work for me, though I find them off the streets and feed them and give them a place to stay. I'm waiting to meet up with them now. He referred to them as his minions, which made something that at first seemed wholesome very unsettling. All of a sudden he then told them that he had just had his wallet stolen, and he'd $400 for something. I don't remember the reason he told them that he could pay them back later that week, but he needed the money right now. My girlfriend politely declined, and at this point was really uncomfortable. She started walking towards the door to leave, and said nice to meet you and good luck. They both walked outside and sat on a bench outside of the convenience store. As they were sitting and discussing the strange interaction, they saw the man exit and stand outside about 10 feet away, waiting for a few minutes looking at his phone. He then met up with 2 other men, and they chatted for a few minutes. The large man in the suit then walked the other direction, and the 2 other men then walked into the store and started holding it up with knives, absolutely shocked and frozen. They both watched as the cashier put her hands up, then emptied out the cash register. The 2 men ran out of the store in the same direction as the man in the suit walked. We were both about to call the police, but saw that the cashier already was. They waited at the bench until the 2 police cars showed up, and then they walked in to tell the officers what they had just witnessed and tried to help identify the robbers and the man that they had just met. I wonder, though, if this is a common thing in terms of organized crime, because to me it looked like this guy had paid homeless people to rob and commit this crime. So this happened to me quite recently. For practical and economic reasons. I used the taxi service, the fixed price, which cost me less than taking my vehicle, especially given the place where I live, as it's an ultra-rural village, isolated from cities, and where necessarily to go to the bank or go shopping you have to hit like 10 to 20 kilometers. In general, the taxi service I use is ultra-professional, recent vehicles, clean, maintained, friendly driver, always a friendly, random conversation, always on time and almost always the same drivers too. But one day, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was entitled to a new driver, which was nothing special. I suppose it seemed like the same impeccable service, nothing to complain about, really. But 2 weeks ago, this gentleman, who already told me to call him by his first name, gave me his age, his nationality, information that came out of nowhere, and continued his conversations by explaining that he bought a connected printer but can't get it to be recognized by his smartphone. So I try to give him some advice and it sort of stops there. Again, though this D has a really enthusiastic mood, a little bit too much for my taste, so I don't pay attention to it. He keeps talking to me about his printer again, and blurts out to me, "You who work in this field, you can help me." I can't. It's not connected. If you want, we can add ourselves on Messenger and you can help me. Since we had arrived at my destination, I stammered out an answer. Something like "I'll think about it later," but I knew that I needed to not talk to this guy about my work, because I'm actually a computer technician, among some other things. So it would be obvious that he could get my number for this. In the end, though, I ended up forgetting about this moment, since I had to help a friend. I was mired in a complicated divorce situation, where there was domestic violence and stuff. Suffice it to say that this divorce worried me a lot, and that this moment with the taxi, I just ended up forgetting about it. Because of all this, except that I had to move and I necessarily called the taxi again, and after barely getting in a sudden urge to get out of the vehicle came over me. All of a sudden he says hello to me, but using my first name asks me for news about my father's health and some more playful humor. I guess I specify that once again, I never mentioned my first name, nor mentioned my father to this driver. Suffice it to say, though, that after this we sort of drove in silence. In any case, I do what I have to do, and in the store parking lot, I call the taxi center to order a taxi for the return. The gentleman replies that there is already a vehicle that has dropped off an old lady, that I have to meet her and notify her instantly that she can pick me up. I arrived at the level of the driver, and again it was this same driver with a big smile. He helps me by putting my bags in the trunk, and at this point he sort of gives me a tactile gesture on my back. I don't know. It felt like a bit of caressing, almost whatever it was, though, it made my blood run cold. The driver, though, asks me to get in the front because the rear doors have a problem unlocking or something, and it was at this point that I honestly almost backed out of this. I get in the front, though, telling myself 10 kilometers by car it will go quickly, and I tried to hide my emotions, but that was a mistake. This ultra-curious guy was talking to me, asking me a ton of questions, and it almost seemed like he was trying to direct my answers. The questions were very focused on explicit content, though increasingly scandalous, not to say that things got very direct after a while too. He would insist upon things like when I finish, you must compliment me. Have you ever tried the Moroccan cigar? And always with a really awkward smile, touching the limits of my crotch tactile movements in my direction while I was sticking to the door. He was trying to hold my wrist, though, as I was attempting to fix my hand over the central locking button. The doors, which had no problems in the end, since the onboard computer didn't indicate any warnings, they were accessible, and I genuinely thought about just jumping out at one point. And of course, instead of taking the shortest route, he took the longest, which reduces the time of the route from 10 to 15 minutes to almost 50 minutes. It was also in an ultra-isolated wooded area, which obviously didn't help. In the end, I just tried to maintain my composure. I responded vaguely to his comments, or tried to make little jokes, hiding my growing anxiety. I don't know, and I don't really want to know what this guy was up to, but I arrived at my place. I took all of my bags in one foul swoop, and I just got the heck out of there at home in the hour that followed. The driver spoke to me on WhatsApp too. I blocked him directly after that and I didn't read anymore. But after coming down, I contacted the taxi company, or I explained the situation, and the guy on the phone just answered me with "Are you talking about so-and-so?" I answered the affirmative, and then he answered me in a really weird way, almost in a very "I don't know," like mafia intonation. I have no other images in mind to describe it, but it was like "Don't worry, we'll take care of it." So on the one hand, I said to myself I may not have been the first person that this guy tried it on, which is scary, and also that this will take care of it. I don't know. After this, I think I'm going to use another taxi service. This whole situation is still spinning in my head, and to be honest, I'm still processing it all and I don't know what to think. This was in 2011, a year after I, a female 22 at the time, had graduated college. I was living in my first apartment with a friend. I had adopted the sweetest dog that I'd ever had, a run-of-the-litter Pomeranian, who literally loved every person that she ever met. My nephew, who was young at the time, would sometimes handle her a little bit roughly sweet kid, and would correct him, but he didn't quite realize how little she was under all that fur, and she tolerated it without ever nipping or anything. One day, though, my roommate was gone and there was a knock at the door. It was a handyman, who said that he was there for annual check on appliances. He was wearing the apartment complex's standard uniform and had a badge, so I didn't really think twice about it, even though I hadn't been notified that this would be happening. I just went ahead with it anyway. He comes in and begins chatting and sort of "I don't know," like leering. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but not really as freaked out as when my dog came rushing in between us ears, back teeth bed, and started growling at him. He kind of awkwardly laughed and went to pet her weird choice for a dog that is baring its teeth at you, and she immediately lunged forward like she was going to bite this guy. He leaped back before she could bite him. Tiny dog, large man, but he was obviously freaked out by her. At this point she is straight up barking at this guy. He asked if I could put her away while he worked, and I lied and said that she had separation anxiety, so I recommended that he'd come back another time, when I could walk her, or when my roommate was there, so one of us could be in the room with her. And so he left, but strangely he never did come back. My dog lived another years and not once did she ever growl at any other human, let alone try to bite one. You hear about dogs being able to read people so well. I didn't know if he would have done anything to me while on company hours. I still think that she could sense that he wasn't a good person. In any case, I'm glad that she was there that day, and it is strange that he never did come back. We are 32-year-old female, 32-year-old male, 10-year-old female, and 10-year-old male. Bought our new house this past July from a retired minister and his wife. As soon as we started moving in, we noticed a weird bumping and thumping coming from the master bedroom closet shortly after sunset. Every evening at this time, we were all sleeping on a mattress in the living room waiting for our furniture to be moved. We just sold our respective houses and we are combining households. We had a plumber come and check things out to make sure that it wasn't just pipes thumping, and it wasn't. We moved our furniture in. Over the next few weeks and life continues as normal. We still heard the thumbs from upstairs. Sounded like an animal jumping down off of something up high, and noticed some other odd things happening as well, like the light in our entryway in our garage would randomly be turned on some days when we got home, and so we decided to install cameras in the front of the entries to see if maybe someone had our access code or something, coded entry no key to the front door, and was stopping by for whatever reason. We also had a friend who was an electrician checking out our wiring to make sure that everything looked okay. No electrical issues at all, and also no visitors. In the end. Now one night, my partner was away at work on night shift and I was sitting on the couch watching TV, while my son slept upstairs. Stepdaughter was at her mom's for the evening, and I kept seeing little flashes coming from in front of the oven. I thought that maybe there was a car passing by on the main road, so I checked the doorbell camera, and nothing had driven by. Then I decided that maybe the oven light was flickering on or something, so I watched the oven for a minute to see if it would come on, and instead I saw what looked almost like blue linen moved from one side of the doorway to the other, and then the noises started. First I heard the thumping coming from upstairs in the master bedroom, then the dining room, the kitchen, the entryway, and back up the stairs. I texted my partner and said something is going on in this house, and either I'm losing my mind or some weird spirit stuff is going on, but I feel like I'm under attack, and asked him to come home immediately. In the meantime, I went upstairs to my bedroom with both my cats and waited. The house started to hum in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was almost like static electricity had filled the air or something that was. When I heard a snap, and for a split second I saw my grandmother, who had passed a few years back, standing at the foot of my bed wearing a blue linen top and pants. This detail is important too, but I didn't know what at the time, and I was terrified. So I called out enough and it was gone. The air calmed down. The anxiety left. The house was quiet. I immediately messaged my cousin and said, "Dude, I think I just saw Nanny in the house, and I need you to tell me that I'm not nuts," and described what I'd seen too, which she sent me a photo of her, and said this outfit. Man told me that it was the outfit that my grandmother had been buried in. Apparently I didn't attend the visitation prior to the funeral, because I lived hours away at the time, and I just moved back to my hometown in July, so I didn't know this. My partner came home at around 11:30 p.m., and laughed at me because I sweat my entire body outline into our sheets. I told him what happened, and we changed the sheets and sat up for a while, being reasonably freaked out, and then we just went to bed the next morning. I thought that I'd gone bonkers, so I messaged a medium my friend recommended, and we met a couple of weeks later, and she told me that she felt my grandmother was coming around to try and warn me about something and to stay alert. That was in December, and 2 months later, the next time that my son and I were the only ones alone in the house. We were woken up shortly after midnight to the neighbor kicking our front door in and screaming for us to get out, because our house was burning down with us inside of it. We got out and everything was okay in the end, but the fire marshals inspected after the fire was out and told us that there was apparently an issue with the chimney, and evidence that every time that we started a fire in our wood stove when it started getting cold around November, there was more than likely a small fire smoldering in our walls, drying out the wood until eventually it dried out enough to catch fire inside the wall and just burn all the way through. No one will ever convince me that she wasn't there trying to warn us that night. Everyone survived. The house burned to the ground, and it was honestly the most terrifying set of experiences that I've ever had. Every time that I think about this story, my brain just breaks. It was 2014. My girlfriend at the time and I went on an impromptu camping trip up in Northern California. I'm not quite exactly sure where, but we lived in Sacramento and drove about 4 or 5 hours up I-5. We were up in the hills and drove down some pretty sketchy roads. Once we found a spot, we parked our car and hiked maybe half a mile in truly in the middle of nowhere. We set up our tent and made a small fire appear about 25 yards away. I would guess the day was fine too. We hung out and did camping things, and when it was time for us to go to bed, we put out the fire, got in the tent, zipped it up, and we went to sleep. But this is where it gets really weird. You see, the girl woke me up at about maybe midnight to tell me that she was going to find a place to pee, but she was struggling to get out of the tent. I can't find the zipper. She says it's just gone. So I get up to help her, and as I feel around the walls, they are completely smooth. I grabbed the flashlight and then I turned it on to investigate, and it was then that we found out that the zipper was actually under us. All of our stuff was still in order as we left it, but we were now sleeping on the door of the tent. We rolled the tent to finally get out, and when we finally do, we find that we are right next to the fire pit that we built 25 yards out. We were so terrified and confused because there was just no way that we could have slept through, both of us rolling a tent that far, with all of our stuff staying in its place like that. We stayed up until the sun came back up, and after that we left right away. I still have zero explanation as to what happened that night. I entertain some pretty out there thoughts, but this one is one that will sit with me forever, as the strangest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. Almost a year ago, I was an opener at a resort clocking in before 5:00 a.m. each day. The resort is located inside of an affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy town or suburb. Employees had to park in one of two parking lots at either ends of the property, and the lot that I chose was adjacent to a long and windy road outside the resort which led to the rest of the neighborhood. The road and the resort were separated by a short range of brush and trees that no one ever walked through. So I arrived one morning per usual, and put the car into park and my headlights still on. The lights in the lot weren't ever on in the morning, since nobody else really showed up before 6:00 a.m. when the sun was out, so it was usually always dark at the start of my walk. Safe for the security as well. I was one of the first employees to arrive on the property each morning, and was thus usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at this time. This morning didn't seem any different either. I had my hand literally at my keys, my brain in the process to turn off my car, when all of a sudden I noticed a young girl, maybe like 14 or 15 years old, come sort of scampering. Her body language was the exact definition run with quick light steps, especially through sort of fear or excitement through the spin of the trees that separate the resort from the outside road. She was directly in front of the car, and my headlights illuminated a clear view of her in the pitch black. She looked like she was maybe in high school, had long blonde hair, and was wearing a jacket with pajamas. Maybe like she just walked out of a house. Perhaps one thing about her that bothered me, though, was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laughing from outside the car, obviously, but she was visually jijing or something, and I wasn't aware of or could see what she was laughing at, and it was really unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her too, as if somebody else was waiting there away from the headlights. Maybe she then waved at me, like it was a normal gesture at this time, and then immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened in a matter of seconds, and I wasn't really sure what was even happening. Besides my anxiety spiking at first, I know that I simultaneously sort of have yanked the auxiliary cord from my phone to shut whatever song I had been playing off while grabbing for the lock button. I remember feeling panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock, when the girl began pulling violently and incessantly on the door handle on the passenger side. I realized then too, that because I didn't turn my car off, it had stayed locked. She began pounding on the window though, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside. Like this was some type of game, as if I were a silly friend not letting her in as a joke. After a few seconds she stopped the pounding and trying to open my car door. Her face fell flat, like I had disappointed her, and she started to walk away from my car. Back the way that she came, she waved at me again, before squeezing through the trees out of view of my headlights. The whole encounter confused me almost as much as it scared me most people that I've told the story to just chalked it up to her being on drugs. But that narrative hasn't felt right to me, despite her behavior. Maybe she was just being an extremely out-of-touch teenager, whose parents need a firmer grip on her. My first thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not sure if that would fit this scenario, as I'm not the most well-versed with the subject. I told someone when I made it to LP, but they didn't seem to care much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that I'll never get it out of my brain, though how off the feeling was watching a stranger, seemingly alone, pop out from the trees in the darkness, laughing and then try to violently enter your car in an empty parking lot. I do think the possibility of somebody else being present the whole time is a lot more scary, and I wonder who else was there and also where exactly. For some backstory. I moved in with my ex-boyfriend at his parents' house when we were 17. I'd known him since kindergarten, and was aware of his night terrors for at least 5 years. I believe they may have gone on for as long as they lived in that house, though I'm not sure how old he was when they moved in. I didn't know much about night terrors and didn't know anyone else who had them. He also didn't want to talk a lot about it, so I never pressed. When I noticed him having one, I just saw how he would breathe heavily a few seconds to minutes and wake in a bad mood. I would best describe the mood as sort of withdrawn and irritable, I guess, and would take a few minutes to level out in order to be approachable again. The night terrors caused him to have severe insomnia, and he would only ever sleep very few hours over the course of days. I'd been living there for a few months and never had any feelings of unease, which is very odd, since I'm usually sensitive to energy shifts from previous experiences. Some days I would wake up and go into the kitchen to see open cabinets or drawers. I didn't think too much of this and figured that somebody must have left them open after a midnight snack until one morning. I jokingly mentioned how someone keeps forgetting to close the cabinets to his mom, and she replies with "Yeah, that's just the shadow people," as if it was something that she just casually forgot to mention. They do that all the time, followed by telling me that she and her husband both have seen them in different areas of the house on multiple occasions. But since I hadn't experienced anything there myself, I just sort of laughed it off. I guess at this time our bed was against the inside wall of the house, beside the door from the hallway. My ex liked to play a joke on me when I would leave the room, where he would reach over to hold the door handle so it wouldn't turn, when I would try to get in harmless fun. No big deal, and we both thought that it was funny. One bright weekend, though, I thought that it would be good to do some spring cleaning and rearrange the bedroom furniture. I opened the windows to let in some cool breeze, clean the carpet, pushed the bed back against the outside wall next to a window, and pulled the TV stand to the foot of the bed. After my ex came home, we ate and took turns having showers. When I went to open the door to the bedroom, the handle didn't turn. I chuckled, since I was used to him playing that game, only this time, when I went to turn the handle again, it still didn't budge. I thought that he was probably wanting to play a little more than usual, so I tried twisting the handle back and forth multiple times, but it stayed stationary, and when the latch finally released, I pushed the door open with such force that I stumbled into the room, only to see my ex playing Xbox with his headset on, sitting 15 feet away from the door, and wondering why it looked like I just fell in. And that was the first time that I felt like something could be in this house. It was fall too. When the knocks first started. We'd been having some strong winds accompanied with cold rain. At that time, there was only one other house that shared the dead-end road to the top of the hill where we lived. It was late in the evening. The rain knocked the satellite out, so we got out some DVDs and we put on a movie. At some point, though, we both heard scratches on the walls from the shrubs and the tree leaves hitting the siding in the windows, and then 3 very faint knocks came from the wall to the right of the bed. This was an exterior wall at the front of the house, so we decided that it was from the wind. Some minutes passed when we heard 3 more knocks come from the wall next to the closet, an interior wall with a large shirt dresser along it. We decided at this point to recreate the sound by knocking on the wall behind us just to confirm the noise that we heard, and less than a minute later, 3 clear knocks came from the wall directly behind us. We knocked 3 times back. Then the knocks started coming from what seemed like all of the walls at once. They were much faster and louder this time, and seemed to have no pattern as to where they were coming from. And just as fast as they came, it all stopped at once. We told his parents, who came into the room, and they knocked 3 times in the wall, and they got the same response echoed back. So back to night terrors. For more scares, subscribe.